it helps, it really helps, because that's how we use that funding to help transport the kids back and forth here, because, you know, they live out in Salmon River, and to go pick them up, come back, and then take them back and come back, that's 4 trips for a vehicle going out to Salmon River, you know. The health department used to provide the transportation, but that was phased out. So that is such a big help. We really do appreciate having that. You know, so through NCD they provide $8,500 every year, so we use that to help pay for transporting the kids to and from. But I know what you're saying again about the parents not being interested, because, you know, they have to eat, and that's their first priority. But like Loretta suggested, if there could be a life skills program where they receive some kind of stipend for going to life skills, but it's language life skills.
And I wrote a proposal 2 years ago requesting some money out of Ottawa to do just that. And of course they told me to get bent. And then this year they cut our life skills dollars completely. So what was historically a 35 or like gone. So it would be nice if Ottawa had some interest in this as well. But
that's probably a big point for Cookville.
Yeah, I mean,
to get Ottawa interested.
We tried to include as much cultural activity in that life skills program as we could. There was something at least weekly for an hour or two. The participants were not opposed to it, generally speaking. But, you know, that 40 grand a year has just disappeared. And what they did is they took it and they gave it to post-secondary to fund training. But I was peeling it off for life skills, so. And it's gone, and it doesn't sound like it's coming back either. The word that I get is that it's not coming back. So. Yeah, and they did it to every band. It wasn't just us. It was everybody, and I think it was about $5.1 million that they passed on to post-secondary institutions to develop Aboriginal specific program. But what it means for our folks who are on social assistance is that they miss out on that opportunity for growth and change. And they miss the cultural piece. And besides that, we were feeding them. So there's that piece, is that part of healthy diet and lifestyle going. So.
Just around the whole social development piece and the people that are, you know, that have to be living on social assistance. You know, how can the language help there? You know.
Yeah, particularly for our single parents. And our two-parent families who are on social assistance, how do we create something so that they can participate in the language as a family, right? How do we empower them? And, you know, right now we have 4 two-parent families and about 13 single parent, 5. So it would be a class.
Mm-hmm.
20 people, 25 people.
Are you able to do incentives still? Or is that?
It's iffy. We gotta pull it out of special needs, and then I can't buy fridges and stoves. If it doesn't take long if we do incentive at $100 a person or $50 a person. Then what do we do about washers, and refrigerators and stoves, beds? And of course, they did cut our special needs budget as well. So.
I think that one would need some thought around social development.
Some kind of incentives. Immersion camp. Kind of what I was just thinking as we were talking. Investment. On a monthly basis. I don't know. Just thinking different models.
And then Sean has got a pretty dry department in terms of, the language stuff, really. But your comment about the signage, I think is good, and we have provided, some of the signage that the city of Enderby has asked for, that's come through this department. What's her name? I want to say Dakota. Tundra Baird has been the representative from council that's actually come up and requested, translations for signage that they wanted. So the KKA worked on that for them. Yeah, and we provided that to them. So we have been doing some of that type of work, but again, that's just out of our spare time, right? We've done that. But for the housing, maybe, the signage on the reserve is certainly an avenue that could be worked on. And then possibly something cultural around the housing, like our winter house. If there could be some kind of a project that could help people learn how to make those. With such a housing shortage, maybe our young people would not be adverse to living in a winter home if they knew how, if we had the technology of how those work. I think we've talked a little bit about maybe trying to get a project at some point of people actually living in a winter house for a whole season, for the winter season, which they were actually designed for, to find out what's wrong with the design. Or how to improve the design so they are livable, And I think in other parts of the world, people are actually living in earth lodges, Yeah, and with over half of our population living in urban areas because we can't support them to live at home, and we have the land base. It seems like we're missing an opportunity for traditional style of housing that met our needs at one time. If they could be designed an ultra-modern design earth lodge, that would be so cool. And then just the language around that, And then child welfare. That one again is as equally as important as the title and rights. I think just in terms of any arguments that we would have to make around jurisdiction of our children, the language would be such a big component of that, and what the program is able to do in terms of language retention. Yeah, I think just politically, all of that, and then of course the need for the children in care. I think the resource kit that the child welfare program is designed is definitely a step in the right direction. If there could be more, if there could be, like how could our program help when kids come into care? You know,
That's a good question. And actually, one thing is we like to use the daycare as much as possible because it is such a fabulous environment on all levels. But one of our barriers to some of our kids that come into care is that the parents work all year round. So they need to find alternate care during the summertime. So that, for us, that's a huge stumbling block because often they look at other daycare resources because they can't stop and go. So, you know, in terms of a barrier, that's definitely one that exists for us. But, you know, we love this program. We love everything about it. We just wish it went all year round.
So how do we extend the funding so that it could go all year round? What would that cost? How much money do we have to raise?
well, I think that's the board of directors and our new EDs would be able to answer that.
Okay.
You know?
Over to you, Deb. No.
First day and she's already got a hot seat.
Friday.
She'll think about it for a couple of days and come back on Friday with the answer.
Yeah. Another area that might help too, or there might be a gap where we can help is, number one was the names, the naming thing that really is something that needs to be carried on. And again, we were taxed in posting that every year, you know. But definitely, it's such a valuable thing to the self-esteem to have our own names. And I know when we went to the university, it was so neat. Because here's a whole class of university students, and we went down with all of our group of kids, and then we did the introductions. And after the introductions, I realized every one of us that was there had we were able to introduce ourselves by our Indian name first. Every one of us that was in that group. And just how that elevates you to be able to do that. So, you know, we need to be able to, our whole community needs to be able to have that feeling of what it feels like to have that name. Yeah. But when the kids come into care, in terms of who is their family, that's the other really big important piece of our language and our culture, is who is my family. So for the child welfare program, when a child comes into care, I don't know what process you use to identify who's that child's network in this community. You know, like how do you identify that whole group that's responsible for that child? You know, it's another, that whole membership, the whole naming thing, and that is another whole activity of a resource center.
Just as you're talking, Rosalind, I was thinking about a couple of things. One of the things that I think would be important to have for the administration is an orientation package for new staff. So who is Splatsin? Who is it? What community are you coming to work for? So that people can start to understand the dynamics and who we are. Right? Often we hire people and they don't even realize that we're Sequep. You know, they automatically turn their mind to us being Okanagan. Right, you know, those types of things. So just some really, you know, simple orientation. And then that turned my mind to Cindy's program with foster parents, having a educational orientation for people that want to be, or have a part of the orientation for new foster parents. So, you know, you're going to take some of our children, so this is who we are, right? This is, you know, our beliefs and our culture and some of our language, so that the foster parents know. You know, I think those would be two things that would be very helpful as well.
I think it's a really good point to even injecting some traditional words and phrases, even in our foster parent agreements, like really tailor them to really represent what they're supposed to represent. Would be great.
Yeah, maybe even change it from foster parents and give them some other name, like auntie or something, you know, whatever that would be, to to identify them in our language, who they are, what their role is, and help define what that role means.
That would be brilliant.
Mhm. And also, another area that might be helpful for the child welfare program too is when you're in a negotiating meeting with the ministry or with government or whatever, your staff it might be useful for them to be able to say something to each other, a way to communicate with each other about, you know, zip it up, you know, or something, you know, or be careful, or, you know, I don't know, you know, in a negotiating meeting, you know. I know your program in particular is fragile, you know. Yeah.
For sure.
I think it just adds something to the program as well as, and I know that your staff try to utilize as much of the programs and resources in our community, but our school is really that part as well, that where, you know, when and possible, you know, we would, that connection to our community. I know that you know, just the experience that I've had and seen is that our children, the thing that has moved forward over the number of years is where our children didn't even know one another's families sitting in the circle here. Today, our children know whose family is who and so on and so forth, and that's a great thing. That's the thing, you know, the biggest thing, so that when they leave our school, they already know, you know, the older kids, they know whose family they're from. And I think, you know, that's what our school does, you know, as well. There's many other things, of course, but like what Rosalind, you were saying, that connection of who they are, that's what our school helps provide that understanding as well. So I know that you guys try to use our school. It'd be something that where it's almost mandatory. I know it's kind of a harsh word, but you know, really try and support that.
He's the harsh person we know. The other thing I was thinking as we're talking, and you know, we got to understand that what we're doing is we're talking about our Splatsin relations, right, with each other, and that's the unit that they destroyed or disrupted with the residential school in the 60s school, our relationship with each other as Splatsin family. And part of that is the young people traditionally went through rites of passage, if you will, to become a man, become a woman. And I think we've got to do some of that work here and put that back on the table for those families that want to go in that direction. Some people will still do it. You know, there's a whole regimen around that, right? And I think we need to start talking about that. So give the young people an opportunity to seek out who they are as young people, as the young boys become men and as girls become women. You know, the puberty rates, and all that's entailed with it. I think that's really, really important part of our work. And we're talking about, because that's part of what's missing, because those young people today, for them, rites of passage is getting a driver's license, being able to go drink, you know, being able to get a cell phone, right? Those seems to be the rites of passage we have today. You know, and I was thinking about that because in times past, you know, it takes a long time, and I was thinking of the words of Kashmir, and we were talking about in the meeting about how we, you know, the mountains, he's talking, pointing to the mountains, says that's our school out there. You know, that everything we need to know is out there in those mountains. And that we need to go to those mountains to ask them for help. And I think that's part of what we need to build back into it. I took those to heart, and that's what I've been doing. I've been going to the mountains and asking for help. And if I would have done that when I was younger, I probably wouldn't have got into all the trouble I did, right? But that was part of the disruption, right? The disruption of the social, you know, child welfare and all that stuff, right? It disrupted our unit as a family. And I think that's what we got to think about, because in the end result is our strength as our families. We all know that. So how do we help those young people become strong so they can have strong families? You know, Daryl always talks about how do we do that collectively, not just one program. It's not one program's responsibility, it's all of those. think part of that is the puberty rights. How do we start introducing that information so that we can, if young people want to go to the mountains, we give that opportunity to, if they want to go in that direction and do some of it, because the training was really rigorous and really it prepared you for life. That's what it did. And I think that's what we need to think about. Because in today's world, things move so quick. That's part of the problem. It moves so quick, is we forget those simple things. Being on a mountain for 4 days without food or water and train is hard to do. A lot of people can't last a day. And it's a discipline all by itself. And we need to start thinking about that, I think. As part of our training, right? Part of training our young people to become Splatsin again. Because that's where they're going to learn it. Because it gives them that commitment. And a big piece of that is the language. That's kind of what I was thinking as we were talking there, because I'm helping other, sort of getting to learn some of that. I just know very little about that. I'm beginning to understand it now. And how important that fall feast is to give thanks for everything. Because that fed us for thousands of years, that food, and still is. And then we go into a ceremony with the dance. And it's an individual thing, but we got a process. Right? That's kind of what I've been thinking about when we're talking. We need to be getting in the kids, and we still have that time to start documenting some of that. And I know that it's really, really important for identity. As young men, young women, today's world is so quick, and you've got to learn to slow them down a little. Best way is the mountains, I think, and the water. Because the mountains and the water are the two things that we use for that purpose. The rivers, Stetpa, Pasapa. I was just thinking about that as we're talking. How important that is.
If I can just add something, and Cindy, I kind of joking and I'm not. And a part of it is because we're really here to talk about the business of how we conduct our community, how that's going to look. And I just say that because I do want to say this is very important, is that when we run a program like this center or Shahia, when our children are pulled out, that school's run on numbers, run on per child sitting in them desks. And it's really hard if we're trying to run a school and our children aren't there for different reasons. When we have our young kids telling their parents they want to go here or there, I talk about this because it's a part of self-wellness or family wellness, however we want to look at how do we address it, because them young kids, yes, I know they want to go downtown. However, what is it that our school provides? And I don't think we get that question asked to our staff enough to really to have the parents understand the importance of that school. And I'm very serious about that, because that's something that we have these young children kind of saying where they want to go, and their parents just kind of listen to that and make that happen for their child to go down to the system. I can see and understand the importance of where people tell me things like, well, I want them to integrate into the public system. And I find that a little bit hard. I know that, and I don't lie about this, I really feel that we have a good staff. We struggle at times at our school to provide a staff. It's hard to forecast down the road for next year to see how many students we're going to have. Because you need to staff that school the way it needs to be, and if we don't know the numbers, we have a rough idea of what it might look like, but last minute, kids, are moved. And that makes it hard to run a program, because then, if we don't have the money, unfortunately, like, how it works. I mean, we just get scaled back in money. And I guess I say that because it's really hard to try and make sure we have that support in place, prior to the school year starting. And, I just thought I'd mention that part.
other thing that's important, like in terms now it's talk about education piece of it, is we need to look at these little spots doing this and this little spot's doing this. So what, you know, like on education, when you look at the education of it, it's so big, right? It isn't. It's more than just what we can struggle to get to survive here. And I mean, childcare programs are funded to a certain degree, and then there's subsidies that go towards paying the operation. But a big chunk of the change that comes into this facility goes to wages, just to pay our staff, you know. And then, so for instance, like Head Start program, right? The Head Start program funds 6 components of things that they think children should be learning. 1/6 of that budget is language and culture. Only 1/6 of it is identified for language and culture. And same with ARDA, because they have all these other things that young children should be learning, and only one component goes to language and culture. But what we're talking about here is the whole picture of education, that the communal needs that we have as a community, as Splatsin. And I think if we keep those questions in mind, who are we? Where is our land? If we could build a department that answers those 2 questions, you know, who are we? And that covers big, right? Who are we? That includes who we are today, who we were in the past, where we're going, right? So that's a big one. And then where's our land? Where's our land base? You know? So those are 2 big things that, and I think again, it's bigger than just the education department. It's bigger than Shahihia School. It's bigger than the Chinook-Salton, you know? But in terms of what we do have in our community, what services we do have, we need to look at how we can coordinate those. Like, how can we coordinate stuff between what we do here and what's done with Shahihia, you know? I think in the past there's been a little bit of competition, you know, over the years. You know, Daryl and I have had to go out in the backyard and have a fist fight over stuff sometimes, you know. But you know,
You need leg rest.
you know, but it's, you know, it's a leveling. You know, the kids leave here, they go to there, and then from there they leave you, and then who covers them? You know, but it should all go hand in hand. Like what we're doing here enhances what you're going to do up there. You know, it should never be a competition, you know. And then I'm not sure about what's happening with, yeah, so.
Can I make a comment?
Mhm.
I agree with complementing one another, and I think the struggles become what I've seen is where, again, going back to our own staff from both sides, and being clear, because it's not at all that, you know, I know we are one people. I know that, I understand that. I think the people that end up working for our community sometimes don't understand that importance and what their part is in saying when they're visitors to make comments around our community. And I guess that's what I struggle with, because I make sure that you know, our staff is really clear who they work for. And I mean that because a part of it is that, you know, we can damage our families by just staffing saying the wrong things to families in our community. That is a lifetime thing. It's not something that's, you know, that I take lightly. And I just wanted to say that because a part of it is, like, you know, as I was listening to you talk, that whole piece of like what we're all talking about, I mean, quite honestly, we need to educate our own staff who's sitting here now of exactly what it is. Like when you talk about ARDA, when you talk about Head Start, or when I'm talking about nominal roll, what does that look like? How does that affect our school? Because not one of us really, I mean, I understand my job, you understand yours, and we all know our own departments, but when we start to understand what happens when we do something that might be a little bit different that will affect our departments, that makes a big difference. So like, you know, I guess what I think we need to do is just educate and have a clear understanding of what it is the education department provides and is able to do to help support as many people. And I agree, education is, it's open-ended. I mean, it really is. You know, we all know that, but I just say that, Rosalind, because a part of that is that we all need to understand how that's going to affect each other. Because sometimes we make decisions based on what, you know, and we need to, I think, come together more often and talk about, you know, how things can look or be prior to the year starting. Just to keep in touch, because sometimes we get, like I said, you know, we get so busy with other things that it doesn't happen enough. Because we just assume, right, that when changes, like, you know, there's been some post-secondary changes. I told Loretta about this. I went to a meeting last week in Vancouver. There's new changes to post-secondary. So, you know, if I don't keep people updated on that, then, you know, it makes it pretty hard for people to follow, right? And I just say that because everyone's department changes every year with how NC does business, or whoever a funder is.
It would seem to me that this is your community's list of language speakers, that you have a cultural state of emergency, and that there's a good deal of urgency in whatever we figure out we're going to do.
I think that's the message that's being delivered to the leadership, you know, is that we are at a critical state right now. You know, I mean, what's going to be here when we leave, what's in place for our community when we leave is what we keep saying. You know, we need to build something so it's in place. And Loretta's, you know, emotion around it, I think, is valid. But I think if we can look at, you know, if we instill a lot of these things into the children when they're at the age that we see them now, if we can instill that in all of the children, when they're the age group that you're working with and Michelle's working with, it's already there. Like right now, we're trying to fill some gaps for them, you know, and we'll do what we can in all of those regards, like finding where can it be effective, where is their interest, you know, all of those types of things. But really, it's got to be infused here. And then by the time they get to the level that your kids are at, and then same with Easton and Marshall, right? Those are going to be the resource people. Those are the ones who are going to be running this center. Those are the ones who are going to be running the resource center if we make it. You know, we're kind of on the exit end of things. You know, but it's them young people and your son that's had language. You know, it's those young ones now that jump up and say the prayer and use and are proud to use the language. You know, my grandson over there, he was one of the ones that went through the child care center. Now he's back as a resource to our community. So that's, you know, anyway, Donna, come on in.
Thank you.
But some communities are fortunate that, you know, well, I think Chief-a-Tom is a good example because they have access to their education funds that go directly into their school, and they're able to use that. Plus, they do lots of, you know, they have all of their education people are in key positions to do what they do. You know. But I think if we make, you know, if we make a body for that, you know, that looks after language and culture or something, you know, maybe we can make some headway.
So if I can put my 2 bits in?
Yeah, anybody else?
Sitting here taking some notes and listening. Really good talk, and if many people know me, I don't like to talk a lot. It's just, let's get to the doing. I know I'm going to do the talking part. I guess one of the questions is, are we at a state of paying people, like Loretta said, to learn the language? And people need to put food on the table. I understand that. Even though my wife and I both work most of the week on a single parent during the week. So putting food on the table is important. I have a language cake that's Virginia Dalzell's cake, but you know, people who are SA, people who are low income, exactly. What's more important you think they're going to do is pick up the tape and start learning the language, or go do that contract job? They're going to go work, right? So is that where we're at, to pay people to learn the language? And if so, where will that money come from? And if we're going to, as council, I think about what are the roles and responsibilities of the people, the citizens, and it's not always chief and council they don't have the answer. We're 6 people, we don't have the answer. Yes, we make decisions to have money allocated, but there's 800 and something band members. Where is their responsibility to pick up the language, teach the language? We have responsibility for that. You know, where are their roles and responsibilities? For being Splatsin, I asked, what is Splatsin? What does that mean? I don't know. I mean, I was raised by my great-grandparents, raised by my aunt and my uncle. But I asked that question to some council today, some people on reserve. What does it mean to be Splatsin? I don't know. I think we have a lot of camps in our reserve that stick together, if you want to call it. We're not a united people. Maybe some people are united. I go to other nations and I have the job up to Miniska, for example. I go into the longhouse. You can just feel the unity they have in the longhouse and the language, and they're in the regalia, they're drumming, they're singing, they're all together. I go to any of our events and it's not like that. For whatever reason, you know, there's people snapping their eyes at other people, don't talk to people because they're a certain family. I mean, so unity, how do we get to a united people? I don't know. The language is missing, yeah. And one of the questions was, can Shahai go to a full immersion school? I don't know. Like Chieftain, because I worked there, and seeing kids get up in front of the room and speak fluently. And so when the kids are fluent, but their parents aren't fluent, so who are they going to talk to? And like your daughters, after a while, they just speak it because they did the music. Yeah, what's important, I guess, as a result, I mean, results don't matter. We're at a point where we're losing the language because of, I guess, what happened before to this point. So how do we get to a point where we love the language and culture? And I know Ray Cormier has a lot of information on title and rights, and I could see him going to a life skills course and doing a module on title and rights. But, to the SA people or the life skills program. And Robbie for the life skills course. That is just title and rights, I'm sure. Who's going to teach it? You know, how do you get there? I know everything needs money, funding, and avoid duplication of services. If we're going to open this up, then the daycare board should be actual language and culture title and rights board of directors, not just the daycare board, right? Have a board that's gonna circulate for everybody. How do we open up to the community? Because I think for some people, they think the daycare board is an exclusive entity. I've heard people say that. Maybe you guys don't perceive that as it is, but that's, some people think that. And I don't know. So how do we make it, like you said, people said, enjoyable to learn, loving to learn, to pass on to our people? I don't know. I like the TRE technology, like the iPod. And, a staff and language department. I think it's staff language and comments department. And Ray always says he needs more capacity in his department. I say two people in language and culture and child rights. I don't see a slot on my name on that list there. So is it people just on the reserve and off reserve, or?
On.
So it must be people off reserve. Like, I know Gerald Blaine, he's up there. But maybe he doesn't want to be part of it.
Yeah, he's never been accessible to us.
Where's our male speakers? I think a lot of it comes down to individualism. Turn that key of learning the language, the culture, the going out on the land. I was talking to some council one time last week. It was like, we could take our kids out of school for a week and give them hunting. That's just one of the practices. Like Cooper says, the land is where a lot of the answers are, so go on the land and take off, like baying of the ear, hunting. We've never done that. I think the teachers might not like that, but that's an option. But it seems to come down to money, funding, like you said, competition for money. I think we're all on the same page of wanting to revive it. Just how to do it, right?
Well, I think at this meeting, it's still a collecting, right?
Yeah.
It's still collecting. So this is from the departments, right? There's still another area of our community, you know, that probably has some needs, and maybe whoever else missed the first two meetings would be welcome to come to the third meeting. And I would think by the fourth meeting, the last meeting would be to actually sit down and start putting together a plan, and maybe out of that will come the body of people that's going to take it on and form some kind of a language advisory board, or the group that's going to drive it, because I mean that's it's going to take that, and I know the chief and council is busy, but still it is your responsibility. Your people are your responsibility, and your people is your language and your culture. And if it's in the sad state it's in because of what's happened to our community, we need to fix it. And as leaders we're saying, you need to help us fix it. We've got a major problem, but we don't have access to the purse strings. You guys do. We don't have access to the people that are taking the resources off our Kulmakulu. You do. So you have to hear us. You have to hear us, and at the end of that, all of that, help us make a plan. That's all we're asking. We're not asking you, any one of you individually, to fix it. But we're saying we are in a crisis situation, and we can just leave. We can just fade away, because that's what's happening to us. 12 years ago, 15 years ago, there was like 22 people on that list, you know. We're down to now, we're down to that, to end of that, you know, and we will just fade away with it. You know, we don't wanna take everything, we're trying to leave as much as we can here, so that those that are coming behind us will have something to hold on to. You know, they're gonna need it. You know, with what's coming ahead of them, they're gonna need it, you know. So, we're offering to help with what resources we've collected and what time we have left. We're willing to help, but we don't have the resources to make it happen. You guys have access to that. All of you that have access to the government funds, you're in a better position than we are. You know, so the onus is on you when you're applying for funds or looking at funds or whatever. You know, it falls on your shoulders. This crisis situation, you share in it. You know, it isn't just us.
I have a question for Wayne. Are we going to the wrong group? Where does the 17 Nations Language Authority fit in on all what we're talking about?
Went to which group?
It's you know, you can go with 17 bands got a language authority, and all of British Columbia, wherever they got a language authority, and they divide money. So I don't know how many bands. I don't know how much money was available. Why we don't get any of that as a Eastern Sewettan.
Yeah, part of that goes through this Puffin Culture Education Society. That's the issue, right? That's why we're we have to find a way to access that. That's the issue. The language authority, I think, were you sitting on that with other?
Yes.
I'm not sure how that fits in. We haven't heard from our staff that what's going on there. So. Yeah. Push the issue. One of the things I was thinking about as Daryl was talking, and Loretta, maybe you can think about this, is maybe sort of organizing a bi-monthly or whatever session just on language and culture. Once we develop a plan, just follow up, just sort of monitor and follow up, and where things are going and all of those things, just specifically on language and culture. And part of that is what Daryl's talking about, sharing information with each other as to what each program, what the funding looks like, what is our barriers, right? What are the gaps and how can you address them? Because that's part of what you were talking about. I think that's part of the issue. So how do we how then can we support the family and children in that process? Just thinking of management, I was thinking of a system so that it doesn't die once. Because my problem is with Dennis, we talk and it just dies. So how can we just keep building some momentum on this?
I've had my mind turned to that after listening so far today. I think we can take the minutes from the last meeting and this meeting and the next meeting and actually do sort of an internal SWOT process, and then actually use that to develop a written strategy with outcomes and ways to sort of check back and see if we're making progress.
I was just gonna ask, we've done a lot of planning here recently in the community. How does this fit into it? Is there stuff in the plans and the strategies that we've already talked about? Should we be revisiting this, looking at it to address this issue?
It's my understanding that in the comprehensive community planning, that culture and language is one of the issues that the community raises as to what needs to be done. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was one of the priorities.
And I was looking at the healing strategy in particular, but I was wondering.
It's in the CCP, the council strategic strategy, and it's also in the healing strategy. All of those identify language and culture as priorities. But we have never actually taken it and created a specific strategic plan with a work plan. Who's going to do what and how to move that forward, and that's the piece I think that we're trying to achieve now. And then from that we can develop a budget and where the money comes from.
Sorry, I was in asked when you were talking about, I heard you say about a committee. So is there gonna be a committee formed from the 4 meetings that?
Well, I think that it's surfacing, that's surfacing as a need, right? You know, it can't, you know, like, I mean, the Tumasalton board, you know, has already, you know, has its duties. This being one arm of it in terms of how we develop and deliver language and culture to children in this center. It never was for how to do it for the whole community. I mean, we've taken on that role because it just evolved that way, right? And we've tried to meet the need as the needs have come to us, you know, but we've really taken on more than what we can handle in terms of meeting what the community needs, you know.
I was just gonna go back to what else, comments there on the plans. I haven't remember reviewing them in detail in terms of language and culture, but I assume we must have established some goals. And I guess that's the question I have. What is the goal at the end of the day here? How are we gonna measure success? I'm just that type of person. I always think tangible, right? And try and make things measured and make a pathway to our goal. So I guess that's the question is, what is the goal? Is there a goal identified in the healing strategy or in the CCP or in the Chief of Council strategic plan? And is it in line with what you have been doing? Is it in line with what you're thinking right now? And, you know, do we need to establish a new goal and start looking at, you know, here's where we want to be in 10 years, you know, start biting it off in small chunks. But, you know, like that's something I just been thinking about is just, what is the success? Like what would be a perfect world here? Is it we're all speaking it fluently in our community and we're bilingual? Is it, you know, we instill it in our workplace and in our schools? Like what is the goal here?
I don't know if that picture will be clear until after the 3 meetings and then the planning meeting at the end of it. Okay? But just in terms of language and cultural planning for what it looks like in whatever formal thing that is done through the administration unit, I don't think we've ever sat down and talked about. We haven't had that discussion. It may have been in bits and pieces through, however, you know, but
right.
In terms of what we're talking about today, we have never had that discussion.
I think it's important myself, just because then it gives you a direction and making sure that, like you were talking about earlier, you know, you guys feel like you're competing against each other between Daryl and yourself. But if we've got the same goal, you know, that helps us keep going in the right direction. And you know, in the back of our minds as staff, that's the direction we need to be going in terms of language. And we can always have that there, right? It's kind of our vision. I think there's some value in that, but I just don't remember seeing that in those plans we did. Actually, we said it was important, but we didn't say what the goal was. And I think that's always a really good step in toward getting some success. Right?
Well, you know, if you can, right now, if you look at the departments that exist in our community, as departments that service our communal needs, right? We have the Department of Finance, we have the Title and Rights Department, we have the Youth Department, Social Development, Housing, you know, Child Welfare, Education. We don't have Language and Culture as an entity on itself to meet those needs that we've all just been talking about. And you have to have that. You have to have that.
Absolutely.
That's the big gap.
Yeah, you don't do it justice at the side of your desk.
No. And what we're saying, we're trying to do we got a little pot here. We try and you know, add to the speech on what we got. And Shahidi has got a little pot up there, but it can't. It's not big enough to do what we're talking about in this room here. It's got to have its own department, and it's got to have its own staff, and it's got to have its own budget. You know,
So
it
there's the
doesn't go
goal.
anywhere.
Well, no, I hold on.
Is that the goal?
I think that's partly the goal, but then, you know, you establish the goal, you establish the department, but then what are they doing? They need a mandate.
Yeah.
They need
So
a
you want
mandate saying,
10% on reserve fluency within 3 years, like that kind of thing?
I don't know
And
exactly.
then another 10% 3 years after that?
Or maybe just have a full curriculum at every school our kids go to, like Enderby, Armstrong, I don't know, but those are details that would have to be figured out. But I think you definitely wanna have a pretty clear pathway for that department, if there is a department or an entity established, right? You don't just wanna create it and have it kind of be reactive, you want to probably have a pretty good vision of where it's gonna go.
Well, that department could could meet the needs, could help meet the needs of the title and rights in terms of that whole curriculum development piece that needs to be done there in terms of our land base.
Absolutely.
There's a whole section of work that has to be done there by a whole group of people, you know.
But you can see, I'm just playing a little devil's advocate here, but you can see that the title and rights piece, a lot of it is research. And it's more technical and really, it's not that other piece which is probably more critical or equally critical is the education of the community, right? Getting the people speaking the language and not only using it, right? Actually utilizing it. So there's almost two pieces there, right? Because my piece is more going back, researching, analytical, and doing a lot of more thinking as opposed to educating. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying stuff to think about. I think it's all good myself. I'm obviously supportive, but I just...
Yeah. Well, even at places like TRU right now, I think that for credits, you can take second language, you can take Secwepemc, you have an option now of taking Secwepemc as a second language, you know, for credits at university level. And I think they're working towards that at the high school level, right?
Slowly.
They can do, so there's a benefit. You know, and it's proven that people who have two languages, children who have more than one language do better.
Absolutely.
Do much better, you know.
So, question, how realistically, are I fluent in 4 years or less?
Sorry?
Could I be fluent in 4 years? Or
Yeah.
less?
With some of the new methodologies that are coming into place, and commitment.
Yeah, how much time a week or hours per week?
It's really on you.
Yeah.
I'd say. Like, I'd say it's all on the person and their own commitment, really. Because that's what it has been. Like, we went to this thing and, yeah, people learned in, what was it, how long? 5 months?
5 months.
But that was like every day studying rigorously for 4 hours. And in 5 months they achieved full fluency. But that's also putting off your job and everything, and they did that for a thesis, so they got funding. But
Yeah.
it's also like becoming fluent and staying fluent, because that is one of the things that they realized is that, yeah, we can teach it in schools, but after that, people are still going to leave, so we need to make places where it is acceptable to speak and stuff like that.
So social and cultural activities that are ongoing that would sustain.
Yeah.
We almost need to make the language become the normal and the English to become the not normal, you know, in everything that we do.
But, you know, like that system that we're talking about, that we went to the university to listen to, that 5-month immersion camp, that was for the adults. So what that does is it increases your resource base, because then you could take people that are semi-fluent or really interested, and you could get them, at the end they can teach. At the end they can take on a group and teach another group. So you increase your resource base. And we are in discussion with UBCO about trying to set something up like that, you know. But again, that's for the community, because that increases the resource base for the community. But that's something that we're doing under the auspices of the Child Care Center, which Salton here, right? But that's what when we set out to do that 12-year language plan back then, one of the things we said then was, we only have one person in our community that can read and write the language. That's a problem, because all of our resource material is written. So we need to be able to read this stuff, right? So then that's when we arranged to bring in SFU, bring in Marianne Ignace to teach how to read and write the language using the system that was developed by Professor Kuipers, right? So out of that, we increased our resource base by 5 people. So there's 5 of us now in our community that came out of that course that can read and write our language. So that increased our resource base, but it's still not enough, you know? But anyhow, in learning the language, we're not focusing on reading and writing it. You know, we did it so we could understand the resource material. But that's not where our focus is with the kids. We don't teach them that. That's kind of at the end of the day, you know, at the end of the equation, we would be interested in teaching that. But it's hearing it and just depositing it in their heads right now is what we do, is, you know, just putting money in